Hello, I'm Stephen DiOrio, the Executive Director of the Revenue Enablement Institute. Our faculty conducts an exhaustive analysis of how business leaders are transforming their commercial model to make it more digital, data-driven, and measurable. And most importantly, to get sales, marketing, and success working as one team to maximize revenue growth. We wrote a book on this, and we call this a blueprint for a revenue operating system. To do this work, we interviewed hundreds of senior growth executives and discussed with them how they are reimagining their technology portfolios to connect the dots across the 20, 30, or even 40 tools and systems they have right now to drive revenue growth. As part of that analysis, we have identified 100 technologies that we believe are enabling this commercial transformation. One of those technologies that is leading the commercial transformation is revVana. revVana is a platform, a revenue operations platform, which supports revenue realization, forecasting, and management for B2B enterprises with complex, reoccurring, and long-term revenue models. revVana is helping transform the commercial model, in our view, by connecting data across the entire lead to cash cycle. Getting the key stakeholders in that process are finance, sales, operations, products, accounting, working together to eliminate revenue leakage, shrinkage, slippage, particularly after a revenue event has been booked, which is a huge and growing issue. Specifically, we believe revVana is reimagining the way chief financial officers, chief revenue officers, and their operations teams can manage revenue, realize that revenue, forecast that revenue out into the future, and optimizing it by eliminating those sources of leakage, better pricing discipline, and better allocation of delivery resources and assets. To give you a deeper look at revVana, I'm lucky enough to be joined by the CEO and co-founder, Ted Serentelos. Ted is an established authority on the emerging notion of dynamic revenue forecasting. He's got years of experience improving data flow and cross-functional alignment across this revenue cycle to generate higher revenue growth and operational effectiveness. He's built a revenue and operational forecasting solution that can help business-to-business organizations get much tighter operational control over the booking, forecasting, and realization of revenue across the entire demand chain. Welcome, Ted, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Stephen. Nice to be here. revVana is a platform built on Salesforce natively that is focused on building a bridge between finance, sales, and operations to automate the revenue forecasting processes for B2B enterprises. And really the focus is to try and make this process more dynamic in nature. The main concept that we are building around is the fact that sales forecasting isn't revenue forecasting for most firms. This concept is lost sometimes in the fact that we talk a lot about sales systems, but really lose the focus of what that revenue actually becomes. So we feel that this can be handled by leveraging the data from the field and customers, the people that are driving this information to finance and to the financial operations of the business, while also layering it in with the logic of how these financial teams will eventually recognize this revenue and translate those sales and customer actions, as well as the financial processes that surround them, into a really clear revenue forecast. How did I get into this, right? Started really getting a sense of this problem at my last company, actually, which was a SaaS and IoT firm where I ran operations. We were growing rapidly, doing really well. Our sales bookings were always on target, but we were noticing that our revenue growth was lagging. And when we started digging into it, the main issue was this concept of, after the commitment booking was made, how that revenue would come to fruition. It wasn't as simple as a sale and then magically the revenue appeared. We had a lot of work to do between, implementing, putting devices actually into vehicles. It was a vehicle tracking business. And that would cause a delay. And a lot of parts of the business had to work together to get that revenue into our numbers. So how did we solve it back then? We threw bodies at it. We built spreadsheets, and all of that was a lot of effort, a lot of time that took it, and even the fact that we were all working together on a daily basis, it helped a little bit with things being timely, but we still felt like there was a lag there. So I chalked it up at that point to, where we were a small company growing, and these were growing pains that we had. We ended up selling that company, and I was off looking to do what's next, and met with a co-founder of revVana, Greg Lewis, who was seeing the same issue in the manufacturing space. And it really dawned on us that, this isn't just something that was a small company issue. We were seeing it across the spectrum in a lot of B2B firms, not in tech only, but all over the place. So we decided we didn't understand why anybody hadn't fixed it. So we went and created this business to help companies do this better and more dynamically.
Well, Ted, our research tells us that those conditions are not peculiar to just one or two firms, but in fact, they're pervasive across industry. The digitization of core processes, growing uncertainty, pressure to be accountable for financial returns, and this shift to long-term consumption-based revenue processes are driving problems. And the core of the issue is CEOs are under pressure from their boards and shareholders to ensure predictable growth. It's now a critical component of the valuation of their enterprises. This has led most business-to-business organizations to go after longer-term contracts and repackage their offerings in the form of more predictable revenue models. The issue that we're seeing, and that what you said, is that these revenue streams are increasingly complex, and they've increased the uncertainty of planning several years in the future. It's making forecasting more difficult, as you pointed out. CFOs and operations leaders now have to manage a complex mix of blended revenues that combine product or software and service revenues with consumption-based contracts, time-based projects, milestones, and subscriptions. And more of these revenue streams are being impacted by variables that happen after the booking, downstream variables, consumption, onboarding, delivery, rollout, adoption, layoffs, timetables. So a lot of that information doesn't sit in the financial system. It's being collected in front office systems. And so there are a number of issues. Ted, can you talk about what you're hearing in terms of this revenue realization gap between committed and realized revenues, the inability to forecast quickly, agilely, precisely, and some of the upstream issues that are impacting the return on assets and delivery resources? There's a lot going on here. Tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, first, I think commenting on these forces is important because you made a point about this shift to consumption models, and I laugh sometimes because when you start looking at the manufacturing firms, any really old style B2B company, these companies have always been consumption based. They've always had to do with a relationship with a customer that is a long-term relationship. These aren't one-off just transactions. So that's where we saw this need to really do the alignment around it, because even in companies that make hydraulic pumps, they do a deal, and that deal is not considered just a one-off piece. That looks like a recurring revenue stream, especially in the OEM space. We see this a lot. So the shift to consumption based, my view is the technology companies that are moving to it are having to now deal with what the companies that have been dealing with this forever are dealing with previously. So the other item here, as you said, that the reason I think automation is so critical, it's the alignment and the automation is this uncertainty, is things are changing more rapidly, and not having this data at your fingertips in the time when you can actually act upon it, I think is the critical piece. What happens today is, and we see it, and we'll talk about it here as we go through this conversation, silos exist because of investment and technologies, et cetera, and it sort of forces the organizational alignment off kilter. So our view is you need to automate these forecasting processes, and by automating them, you, I think, can help get the alignment pulled together. And then the end all be all of this whole thing is once the data is there, once you have the process automated, the ability to analyze it gets a lot easier. So you can start seeing these things when you talk about realization by having this understanding of the expected revenue stream and having the teams collaborate as it's moving along and you get this information in real time. It allows for better analytics and better accountability and the ability to then realize what you think you're going to get from these sales with your customers.
Ted, I wanted to build on your point about visibility. It's clear from our research that visibility into revenue performance is a top issue for both CROs and CFOs. Over half of the sales leaders that we talk to, this is data from our book, Revenue Operations, view visibility into revenue generating activity, forecasting, account health, and all the activities that impact those revenues is now critical. The number 1, 2, 3, and 4 issues on their mind. Most, 60% of chief financial officers are making it a priority to leverage analytics and improve data management across these data sets to get better visibility and to drive the types of insights you're talking about. They need to be able to answer questions about why revenues are up, down, slipping, shrinking. And almost half of companies are really struggling to meet these financial and accounting standards that were put in place for these long-term revenue streams like ASC 606 because of the dynamic nature of customer relationships and the struggles to really realize and track revenue over longer periods of time. So how does this foot to what you're seeing in the market, Ted?
It aligns very well, actually. The top two pieces on this chart really, when you talk about, people are saying better visibility into sales activities and then better visibility into buyer response and engagement. We see this a lot with our customers. When you think about revenue forecasting, it's not just new business, right? There's also these existing on account, people call it run rate. That's actually even more challenging because when we have the CRM data for the new accounts, the actual that's just moving forward in many of these companies is completely becomes a financial issue, not a financial issue, an issue in finance where finance has to solve the problem, where they're getting very little feedback from the field on what actually occurs with that part of the revenue stream, which could be substantial in a lot of companies up and above their new business piece. And then again, and it's when we see this thing where people are saying, better insight and data, the data is there. Our view is the data is already there. It's just the ability to pull this data together and drive much better and richer data from the systems that you already have. So CRM's a great place because there's been a lot of investment in the CRM space, not only in the fact that it's a great, Salesforce automation system, but people are doing a lot more operationally in there. So where I think previously, financial people didn't trust this data, a lot of that data now coming out of the CRM system for a lot of firms is been vetted, it's been validated. So it's a lot more trustworthy. And by having it there, it's a lot richer than just taking it, throwing it over the fence and sending it to finance. And then improve visibility. The other piece here, I think, was improve visibility into pipeline health. Yeah, the pipeline health, our view is it's important again, but it's the time horizon past that pipeline coming to fruition that I still think is a missing item here, which will help them with the one above where it talks about forecast accuracy, because you're never going to be accurate. Like I had the problem in my last firm, you can't be accurate on your commitments if you're not understanding what happens after that thing closes. And I think a lot of companies lose their focus when the deal closes. They stop worrying about it, which is really when the action starts happening.
Ted, talked to a lot of revenue operations and new generation CXOs who sit on top of this overall process. And I'll tell you a story. I was on a panel with the revenue operations executives, and he said, this is a lot like that comic strip Pogo. I've met the enemy, and it is us. The real sin here is we know things are slipping. We know there's going to be attrition. We know that there are delays. But the problem is we understand that in the front office and the folks in finance can't get access to that information.
No,
And so
no, yeah.
bridging that gap is just huge.
It's huge. Most companies are forecasting the revenue today. It's just not done well. And this is done by spreadsheet if there ever was one, right? I mean, it's people just, it's the data is literally lobbed over the fence. I mean, not literally, that's fine. The data is thrown over the fence and finance is dealing with it in a stale manner. So while they get the data, then they massage it and they look at it. By the time it goes back to the people that have to look at the big picture, it's already too late. So our view, the reason we talk about dynamic forecasting is, how do you deal with the changes to that in a real-time manner? And by connecting this data and hopefully using our platform to do it, you're actually able to get much richer and much more rapid and accurate understanding of what's happening. Because the key here is not only to say, hey, something's wrong, it's what are we going to do about it, and can we do something about it quickly enough where it matters for our performance?
Well, Ted, let's double click that because there's a strategic context to what you're talking about. Our team analyzed thousands of solutions. And to Ted's point, some of them are front office, back office. We were agnostic. All we cared about was this a platform that is going to drive revenue growth across the sales, marketing, tech stack? And what we learned was that everything is centered around data. Of the 100 platforms that we selected that are transforming the commercial model, over 90% of them were based on AI and analytics. And if you look at this revenue operating system that we've built here, really what's happening is whether it's your customer facing growth assets, insights, or value creating activities, everything is flowing through data. And so, Ted, I'd love for you to talk about how revVana is bridging some of these data gaps that you and I have been talking about here. How are you leveraging advanced analytics and data management to create value by taking that customer engagement data all along the revenue cycle and marrying it up with the financial systems that allow you to do something about it?
Sure. It's funny, the first iteration of revVana was actually just delving into the analytics space. And I think what we noticed really quickly was what we were missing was the data to actually do this effectively. So that's why we built really the platform's real key function here is that ability to create data from the sales motion and the financial logic, like I mentioned earlier. So while getting the data in place and why it's so critical to have it and then manage it quickly is, like we said, things are moving fast, and the concept of why this has to be dynamic again is important. So when the field is in a new business sense, the field is selling something and that deal shifts 6 months, that deal shifts in size. These are material items that will affect that timeline of when the revenue come to fruition. So again, understanding that quickly and generating that data is important. Also, and we see this a lot. One of our manufacturing customers was when they were actually managing this, their teams were spending 60% of their time just adjusting these schedules outside of the CRM system in a spreadsheet, which kept them away from actually selling every day, which is silly, right? It's the moves that they were making on the deal itself should have been able to generate those changes and provide that information to the company. But they were doing it all outside of the CRM system and outside of where they do their job every day. And the other thing we see in the reason why the data is important and from an operational perspective, it's not just dollars here, it's actually units of production, especially, and we've seen this a lot of becoming a big importance with all the supply chain issues we've had over the last couple of years, is the demand part of this changing is critical. So it's not only the dollars are shifting, but the need and the supply issues of these changes are critical as well to make sure that companies can meet the demand. And then I think the last piece on the data, which is important, is, when you do this stuff in spreadsheets, every time you touch data, there's less fidelity to it, right? It's almost like when you take a hack at it, it just gets less and less valuable. Going to the source here and working at the source, you actually get not only the dollars and time, but you actually get the, what rep is selling this is it at a product level? What part geography is this being sold in? And we can start now seeing trends in the data that you can now analyze more effectively. Where we build these, where finance provides that logic, like I mentioned earlier, by getting better visibility on this, you actually can start seeing nuances in the way that your business functions to help you become better forecasting over time. So the goal of this thing is to improve, to actually have a process that operationally gets better, as you go along. And that's where we see companies trying to take this.
Ted, I wanted to have you talk a little bit more about how data actually flows across the revenue cycle. Some people call it the lead to cash cycle, the opportunity to cash cycle. You're spanning the front office and the back office, and you're taking an opportunity object that lives in Salesforce, and once it's booked or committed, it becomes a financial object, and then the information has to flow back. So I would love for you to talk about three aspects here. First, can you talk about how data moves across this lead to cash cycle and the different sources of the data? Second, can you talk about the different stakeholders, from products and operations and account managers at the front to accounting, finance, FP&A in the back, and the operations people and product people who have to deal with this? And you're seeing organizations leverage this pre and post booking information to really start to optimize their revenue and create that feedback loop and that precision that you're talking about. I think this is a pretty good picture to start with, but talk a little bit about those things.
Yeah, the picture's great, but in reality, there'd be lots of like divots and holes in between all those spokes and nonsense going on within it. To us, like I mentioned previously, CRM systems are key to this. And this is why we built the product in Salesforce to start, is we feel like if all this stems from what the customer is doing, and you see that in customer engagement and sales process, what customer success is working on, the start for us here is the view of what the customer is either planning on doing or is currently doing, and getting that information in. Now, once that's there, like we said, the downstream pieces can take advantage of it. And the one thing I think I want to make note of here is it sounds really complicated, but what a lot of companies are doing here is starting really simple and growing on it, right? You can move and make progress just by starting off, just replace the spreadsheet and automate that piece of it. Just do what you're doing today in an automated manner and get more data out of the system. Like we said, the richer data than just fields across the top by customer with dollars